Okay, welcome back everybody. I just wanted to do a quick demonstration on painting the egg. Up at the top of the screen, I did a value scale. I used a mix of French ultramarine blue and the cadmium orange. So the 1 is going to be your darkest value, and then your 5 is going to be your lightest light. So looking at the egg, and I have an actual egg here. I'm going to go ahead and leave this area at the top as my 5, which is going to be my whitest white. I'm going to leave this the white of the paper. I'm going to go ahead and do a very dark background to give this a big contrast on the edge. 3 is going to be about a mid-gray, and then we're going to get into 2, which is a dark gray. 1 again is going to be the blackest black, so I'm going to have a 1 here and a 1 on top. And then I'm also going to have a 4. 4 is going to be a light gray. So we have 5 as your whitest white, and then 4 is the next value up, and that's going to be the reflection of the paper back onto the egg. And then lastly, I'll have a mid-gray for my outer edge. I'm going to go ahead and erase some of these numbers. I'll just kind of hang on here if you all want to take any notes or anything, but I am going to erase them. I could leave the 5. The 1 will probably be covered up, but some of these mid-tones I want to go ahead and erase because I don't want those to be visible in the painting. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a little erasing here. This is the 3. This is going to be the mid. Just kind of lighten that up. And then the 2, I'll just lightly go over that. The 4, definitely want to erase that because that's going to be very light. So I'm just lightly erasing that. And then I have the 3 here, which is going to be kind of that mid-tone. So I can still kind of see them, but they're somewhat erased. And then I'm going to go ahead and very lightly erase out. It'll still be visible to me. Maybe you'll still slightly be able to see it. And I'm going to also erase out this shadow line. I can still see it, but I don't want that, because I did draw it in so dark for the video, I don't want that to be as visible in the painting. So let's go ahead and erase that. And then lastly, I'll maybe go over that 3 one more time, just a touch. Okay. So again, the 5 is going to stay there. I'll keep that and I'll erase it at the very end of the painting, the end of the demo. First thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and paint the egg. Not a whole lot of work done on the egg. I really just wet it with water and then I drop in some of the color. So out of view, I have a big bucket of clean water, and I'm just going to wet the entire egg here with the clean water. Just paint around that 5. Once your watercolor goes over your pencil marks, you're really no longer able to erase them. They're underneath the pigment. Okay, here we go. So I just kind of went around the 5. There's a little bit of an edge up here, but I'm going to leave that the white of the paper so I can go back and erase. And let's go ahead and paint in the egg. This is probably has too much paint on it, so I'll rinse a little bit of that off. And then, let's see, apologies, I'm going to dry my brush a touch and then go back into the paint. Okay, so like I said, the 3 is going to be a mid-tone. So go ahead and drop that in. The water is going to carry it all the way around. 2 right down in through here is going to get very dark. So I can add a little bit more in. I really do not want to get this too dark here where my 4 was. That was my not quite white, but my lightest light. So I'm going to just drop in some paint, let the water carry it. And then rinse off my brush here. And I'm going to go in with what I call a thirsty brush. And I'm just going to go right up along that line. So it's going to pull some of the pigment down, but it's really going to soften that up. So my brush is, sorry, my apologies, my brush is damp, but it's not wet. And I can go ahead and move this around. Take that to the edge. And right here where my highlight is, it got a little dark. So this is supposed to be about a 3, value of 3 here, but I really want that to be soft. So I'm using a thirsty brush and I'm just pushing that back out just a little bit. And also what I can do is I can take some clean water, go right up against it. This is kind of similar to what you guys did with the clouds in class. And I just want to push that out. Let's see if we can kind of smooth out our egg surface here. And again, this is going to be the darkest value back here. If you have a tissue handy, highly recommend using the tissues to lift. You can get very soft, nice edges versus the paper towel, and they're not patterned. So you can go ahead and lift out a little bit. And that's going to kind of keep creeping in. So just lift out a little bit more. And I still think I want to get this a little bit darker on this edge. I really want to get this to about a value of a 3. So let's put a touch more in. And then down through here, this was a 2. So this is going to get a lot darker right through here. This will dry lighter than it looks. So we can kind of let it do its own thing. I'm just going to smooth out this edge and pull this down. I'm going to babysit this just a little bit. And I'm using a little bit of water and I'm kind of drying it off on the tissue. And I'm just trying to get back to that number 4 value right along here. I think what I'll do is I'll just dab off just a touch. So I've got that reflection of the surface back up on the egg. Okay. Just babysit this for a few more minutes. I'm just kind of, I can see that there's a lot of water on my paper. And I'm just gonna sweep this one more time, see if I can push that out just a little bit. I really want to try to save that beautiful white highlight at the top of the egg, and I don't want to lose that. Okay. Nice and smooth across this top. Can barely even see my pencil line. Somebody asked me in class about, you know, do I do a drawing before I paint? I always have a pencil drawing. And like I said, sometimes what I'll do is I'll draw it out and I'll go back and I'll just kind of erase some of the lines. So I have the drawing in there, but the lines are erased because, again, if you put your watercolor over top of your pencil lines, you're going to lose the ability to go back in and erase the pencil marks. So I think that's pretty good. I'll go ahead and let this dry. Okay, now that the egg is mostly dry, there's a little bit of sheen there still. I've maintained this level of 4, this very light gray along the edge, as you can see up here on my color chart. And I've got the 5 right here in the middle. That's gonna be my highlight, and that's my white. So my 5 is gonna be my highest value. I'm gonna go ahead now and paint in my blacks, which is gonna be my darkest dark. I'm not going to go into the water. What I'm going to do is go straight onto the palette, into the paint. And the first thing I'm going to do is this dark shadow right underneath. And I'm just going to go all the way up to the edge of the egg. So this is, I'm doing this painting relatively monochromatically. It's just the orange and the French ultramarine. I could use either one of those colors in the foreground, maybe on the surface of where the egg is sitting, or also on the background, but I think I'm just going to stick with using just this one mix so it stays with the value scale that I created. I'm going right up to the edge. And look, you cannot see my number 1 anymore because that's how dark that is. And you really can't even see my pencil line anymore. It's completely covered up. And that is pretty dark. But I have that nice soft edge of the reflection of the egg. So to really make this pop, I'm going to have a very, very hard edge against the shadow and the egg. So that's nice and dark there. Oh, went in, that's okay. And then let's see, I had a number 2 right here. I can go ahead and add a little bit more paint. This is still wet. So this will be a little darker right through here. And then we go from a number 2 to a number 3, and then we get up into the number 5 across the top. Okay, there we go. I'll let that sit for a minute and let this dry, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do the secondary shadow, as I call it, and then I'm gonna do the top as well. And I think I might also, as this dries, come in and just soften this edge up here and lighten that a little bit too. Okay, my egg is drying very nicely, and I'm gonna go ahead up here and do this background. Again, I'm not going into the water, I'm just going right onto the palette where I've mixed up some of the pigments, the French ultramarine and some of the cadmium orange. And feeling the paper, it's not cold, it's not lifting off on my finger, so it's fairly dry, so I can go right up to the egg itself. I'm trying not to get my entire arm into the picture. It's kind of a weird angle. All right, let's just go straight over. I'm just gonna move the paint all the way up from the horizon line. And you know, in order to make the egg really come off this page, I'm gonna have to do something with this that it's sitting on. Right over that number 1. Let's see. I'm gonna have to turn it. Sorry guys. Bear with me just a second. There's some things I can do, and there's some things I have to move the page for. Okay, moving all of this, and let's just get all the way up to this horizon line. I want this to be really dark. I want this to be the same value of the shadow that is right underneath the egg. You can see now with this big contrast that it's starting to come off the page more. I'm gonna just get some water. Just go right up to that edge and just pull this all the way. I want this go the rest of the way. So kind of lighten as it goes up. Let's see if I can get this line. There we go. Okay, how are we looking? I think I'll mix up some more of the blue and the orange and see if I can get a little darker right across the top edge of the egg. This will probably be my longest video because I'm going to go all the way, and I knocked the camera again, I apologize. I'll go all the way from start to finish in some segments as this dries so you guys can see everything. Okay, so I have it mixed up here. And I'm going to go right up to the edge of the egg. And I lifted the paper so that gravity will help me and pull this down the page. The page is still nice and wet there towards the top. And I think this mix may have a little bit more orange. It kind of seems a little warmer. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and test this. This is dry. So I'm going to go ahead and put the secondary shadow in. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to go over this primary shadow and the secondary shadow, and I'm going to kind of go in there a little lighter. So the secondary shadow I said was in medium gray, about a 3. So it's going to be right in here in this level here. So let's go ahead in. I'm going to cross over the first shadow, so that'll just give it another kind of level of darkness. I think that's too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and use what I have. I'm not going to go back into the paint. I just rinsed off my brush in some clean water. I'm just going to use what's on the surface and just pull that out. Let's see, we'll go all the way around. This funky angle. And this secondary shadow really doesn't have the hard edge like the first one did. Let's go ahead and lighten this up. So after I get it predominantly set in, I'm going to go ahead around with some water and just really try to soften up those edges. And this shadow, which is a 3, this here edge, I sound like a hick. This should be a little darker. So I'm going to lighten this up here very nicely. This is just going to be very soft. This is just some clean water. I'm using a thirsty brush. I'm going into the water and I'm drying some of it off so it's moist, but it's not soaking wet. And I'm just going all the way around before the paint can dry and just soften that edge up. There we go. I like that a lot better. Okay, so that's nice and soft. I can go ahead and carry this all the way out. Okay, there we go. So now it has a lot of room to wiggle. And I'm gonna just go all the way up here. I'm just gonna lift off some of this water here. Okay, like I was saying, I think that this on the end, if I look at the egg here, I think this on the end still needs to be darker in value. This should be a 2, and then this shadow should be a 3. So this has to get darker on the egg. So let me get a little bit darker through here. And I'll just add that in. So this is about a 2. I don't want to go all the way to the edge of the shadow. I don't want that being pulled in. So it sounds like somebody is screaming in my house. I apologize. My son is playing video games. It sounds awful. I promise. That's just a video game. Okay. Here we go. All right, let's let this dry and I'll be back in a second. Okay. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and do another layer over this top section just to give it just another level of darkness. I really want it to be black as much as I can. So I really have a high contrast here. Okay. Okay, to get the egg to pop a little bit more, I did do another layer of the black across the top. My really high value, my number 1, my darkest dark. And now in order to continue my theme of making this thing pop, I'm going to go ahead and go back under this primary shadow and put this in another layer. I have to turn this so I can get my angle. It's very wet across the top, so let me move it this way. I want this to be really sharp. Okay, so this is going in. There we go. Okay, now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back in and I want to soften up this edge between the reflection, which should be a number 4, and also this top part. It kind of bled in just a little bit because I was working so fast. Just kind of tighten that up a little bit. I don't want my egg to be floating. No floating spaceships. Okay. Now I got, this is number 1, that's a number 2, 1 up here. This is my number 5, my highlight. Since this is dry, I can go ahead and take my handy dandy eraser, erase that number 5 all the way off. There we go. So that's gone. You really can't see any of my other numbers, and you can't even see my shadow line too much either. I think that this value here, which is a number 3, actually worked really well. I think still to get this egg to really look like the whitest thing, the whitest object on the page, I'll clean up some of these lines, and I may do another very light wash, maybe a number 4 over this bottom part, maybe with just a touch more orange to make this my whitest object. So let's let this dry and we'll come back in a second. Now I'm going to go ahead in and I'm going to soften a few more edges. I am using the scrubber, And I'm just going in and agitating a few of these spots. I really don't want to have that hard line that's there. So I'm going in with a little bit of water on this. I'm just slowly agitating some of these lines very gently. I like to go, when I use this, I like to go in one direction. I don't go back and forth really. And I just want to pull that back so I have a nice reflection there. And I definitely want to try to change the shape just a touch. It kind of flattened out a little bit when I went back in with the shadow. So let me just change that shape just a little bit. So I think it's there now. I think that looks better. And I think there's just a little spot. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's a little bit of a spot right here. So I'm just gonna very gently go in and blend that as well. I really think I want to get this secondary shadow a little bit darker, and I think I also want to get the surface that the egg is sitting on darker. So off to the side, I did another mix of the French ultramarine blue and the orange, the cadmium orange, with a little heavier on the orange this time. And I'm going to use a lot of water here. And I'm going to go ahead and paint this entire surface. I left too much white up here, so the egg at this point to me looks kind of dirty. So in order to make the egg look cleaner and the egg the most prominent part of the painting, I do want to go ahead and paint this entire surface. So if I paint all around the shadows, not over the shadows, the egg is going to float. So it's important when I go in and I paint the surface that I cover the shadow as well as the surface. So I'm going to go all the way right up to the edge of the egg. And let's add a little bit more water and thin this out. So now I have a little bit better value change there between the surface and the egg. So hoping that then this egg is going to be the whitest and lightest thing on the page. I have to go over the shadow. It looks like right where I agitated the scrubber. Remember we talked about this in class. Once you kind of agitate the paper, you break those bonds, it's going to pull everything in. So probably should have waited and done that last, like I mentioned in class, to do that last, and then I just broke my rule. Okay, and let's just go all the way up to this edge here. What do we think? Maybe a little too dark right there. So just pull that off just a little bit. But I think I like that better across the bottom. So we'll see how this dries. And that going right over that secondary shadow, once this dries, we'll be able to see that come through. I think you can see it pretty well from your angle. I've got quite the reflection on it right now. So let's just go up a little bit more. That paper's still wet, so it's still going to kind of pull. So let me just very gently dab off with some of the tissues. There we go. Now that, to me, that egg really looks very, very white. And I've kept it very monochromatic. And I think after it dries, I may have to go in one last time just to soften that up. But that white of the egg at the top is still there. The white of that paper is still there. And I think I'm about to call this done. Hopefully this helps. Give me a call or a text message if it doesn't. Okay, there we go. Just take off just a touch there, just a touch there. Make that just a little interesting. There we go.